the sound of 20 tons of gravel thundering down like an avalanche. Karen's pristine white BMW disappears beneath the crushing weight as she screams from her kitchen window. But this isn't just about a parking dispute, it's about a widow fighting for the last piece of her late husband's memory and a neighbor who pushed too far. Sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous. When the first time Margaret Henley saw the yellow spray paint on her driveway, she thought it was vandalism. She stood at her kitchen window at 6:47 a.m., coffee mug trembling in her arthritic hands, staring at the bright yellow line that now divided her concrete driveway perfectly in half. On the wrong side of that line sat a gleaming white BMW X5 with vanity plates reading KAREN1. Margaret's driveway had been her sanctuary for 43 years. She and Harold had laid every stone in the retaining wall themselves, had planted the oak tree that now shaded the left side, had painted the house numbers in careful blue strokes on the garage door. Harold had died 8 months ago, and that driveway was where she still felt him, most in the oil stain from his old Chevy. The doorbell rang with the aggressive persistence of someone who expected immediate attention. Margaret shuffled to the front door, her slippers catching on the hardwood Harold had installed the summer before his diagnosis. Through the peephole, she saw Karen Westbrook, her next-door neighbor of 3 years, standing on the porch with her arms crossed and her platinum blonde hair pulled into what Harold used to call a battle bun. "We need to talk," Karen announced the moment Margaret opened the door, not waiting for an invitation before pushing past her into the foyer. She was dressed in expensive athleisure wear, despite never being seen exercising, her manicured nails clicking against her phone case as she gestured emphatically. "Karen, what is that line on my? That's what I'm here about." Karen's voice carried the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to getting her way. "I had a property surveyor come out yesterday. Turns out your driveway actually extends 2 feet onto my property. 2 feet, Margaret. That's nearly 40% of the space I'm entitled to." Margaret blinked slowly, processing the words. "I'm sorry, what?" "The previous owners never properly established the property line. My lawyer says I have every right to claim what's mine." Karen pulled out her phone, swiping to a photo of an official-looking document. "See, right here. That section where I parked is technically my land. The previous owners, the Johnsons, never said anything about the Johnsons were idiots who didn't know their legal rights." Karen's laugh was sharp and humorless. "But I do. I've already spoken to the HOA, and they're backing me on this." Margaret felt something cold settling in her stomach. You can't just take half my driveway. I'm not taking anything. I'm claiming what was always mine." Karen's smile was the kind Margaret had seen on TV lawyers. "Now, I'm being generous here. I could demand you remove the concrete entirely, but I'm willing to share 50-50 split. I've already had it marked professionally." Street watering her petunias, glancing over with obvious concern, the whole neighborhood would be talking by noon. "This is insane," Margaret whispered. "You have your own driveway. You have a 2-car garage. My driveway is too steep for my BMW, the undercarriage scrapes." Karen examined her nails with studied indifference. "Plus, I'm hosting a dinner party next Saturday. I need the extra parking for my guests. Your guests, 8 couples. I'll need all the space I can get." Karen headed toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Margaret, I'd move your little Honda. Before 5 tonight, I'm having my contractor friend pour a proper dividing curb tomorrow morning. Wouldn't want any accidents." The door closed with a decisive click, leaving Margaret standing alone in her foyer, the house suddenly feeling enormous and empty around her. She walked back to the kitchen window and stared at that yellow line, at Karen's BMW sitting smugly on what had been her space just 12 hours ago. Her phone sat on the counter. Harold's contact still favored it at the top of her list. He would have known what to do. Harold had been 6'2", with hands like baseball mitts and a voice that could carry across 3 backyards when he was angry. He'd also been the gentlest man she'd ever known, but he'd had a spine made of steel when someone threatened his family. Margaret wasn't Harold. She was 71 years old, 5'0", and had never confronted anyone more intimidating than a grocery store manager about expired coupons. But as she stared at that line, at the BMW's chrome gleaming in the morning sun, something hard and hot settled in her chest. She called the city planning office first. The woman who answered had the tired patience of someone who dealt with property disputes daily. Ma'am, if she has a legal survey showing the property line, there's not much we can do. Property rights supersede usage rights in most cases. But we've been using it for 40 years. I understand, but prescriptive easements are very difficult. To prove in court, you'd need documentation, witnesses, evidence of continuous use. Margaret hung up and tried the HOA. The president, a pompous man named David Kellner, who lived in the neighborhood's largest house, was even less helpful. Mrs. Henley, I sympathize. I really do. But Karen came to us with proper documentation. The association can't ignore legal property boundaries just because of, well, tradition. She's taking half my driveway for a dinner party. She's utilizing her legal property rights. I suggest you consult with an attorney if you feel there's been an error. An attorney with what money? Harold's medical bills had eaten through most of their savings, and her fixed income barely covered the mortgage payments. She'd been considering selling the house anyway, moving somewhere smaller, but this was still her home, their home. By noon, Karen's BMW had been joined by a silver Mercedes with dealer plates. Margaret watched from behind her curtains as two women in designer workout clothes examined the driveway, pointing and laughing about something. One of them took photos. At 2 p.m., a pickup truck arrived. Two men in work clothes began unloading orange traffic cones and concrete forms. Margaret put on her shoes and walked outside. "Excuse me," she called to the older of the two men. "What are you doing?" He looked uncomfortable, glancing toward Kieran's house. "Lady next door hired us to install a permanent divider. Says there was some confusion about the property line. This is my driveway, ma'am. I just go where the customer tells me. She's got the survey stakes and everything. Look, if there's a dispute, you folks need to work it out. I can't get in the middle of neighbor problems." Margaret stood there as they worked, feeling more helpless with each shovelful of gravel they spread. Neighbors walked by, some offering sympathetic looks, others averting their eyes entirely. Mrs. Chen brought her a glass of iced tea and squeezed her shoulder without saying anything, which somehow made it worse. By 4:30, they had formed and poured a concrete curb exactly along Karen's yellow line. The BMW was parked on what was now definitively Karen's side, and Margaret's Honda sat in her suddenly much smaller space, looking lost and pathetic. Karen emerged from her house as the workers packed up, checking their work with the satisfaction of a general inspecting fortifications. "Perfect," she announced to no one in particular. "This should prevent any future misunderstandings." Margaret found her voice. "Karen, please, this is ridiculous. Can't we work something out?" "Margaret, I tried to be reasonable. 50-50 is more than fair, considering the legal situation. Now, I need you to move your car by tomorrow afternoon. I'm expecting my first guests around 6. My car, for the dinner party. I'll need the whole space." Karen's smile was bright and cold, just for one evening. "Surely you can park on the street for a few hours." Margaret stared at her. "You want me to give up my driveway so your dinner guests can park there? It's not your driveway anymore, Margaret. It's our driveway, and tonight it's my turn to use it." That evening, Margaret sat in Harold's recliner, staring out at the concrete divider that now bisected what had been her sanctuary. The BMW sat on the other side, like a taunting reminder of how quickly everything could change, how little control she actually had over her own life. She picked up Harold's photo from the side table their wedding day, both of them young and fierce and ready to take on the world together, as they had each other. "What would you do?" she whispered to the photograph. The house was quiet, except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The same clock that had marked time through midnight feedings, teenage rebellions, career changes, grandchildren's visits, and finally, the surveying company that had worked on her neighbor's property assessment. The receptionist was polite but firm. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Henley, but we can't discuss the details of another client's survey. That would be a breach of confidentiality." "I'm not asking for details. I want to hire you to survey my property." A pause. "Ma'am, we just completed a survey of that area last week. The property lines are clearly established. Then it should be easy money for you." Margaret's voice carried a steel she hadn't known she possessed. "Unless there's a reason you don't want to do the work twice." 2 hours later, she was writing a check for $800 she couldn't afford to a different surveying company. Marcus Rivera from Precision Land Surveying arrived Saturday morning with equipment that looked significantly more sophisticated than what she'd glimpsed being used on Karen's survey. "Interesting situation you've got here," Marcus said, examining the concrete divider with professional skepticism. He was a man in his 40s with calloused hands and the patient demeanor of someone who'd seen every variety of property dispute. "Mind if I ask who did the original survey?" "Hartwell and Associates, for my neighbor." Marcus nodded slowly. "Jake Hartwell's outfit? Good guy. But ... double quotes. Let's just say I'd want to double-check his work if I were in your position." Marcus began setting up his equipment. Property law is tricky business. 1 degree off in the measurements, one misread benchmark, and suddenly someone's concrete divider is sitting on the wrong person's land. Margaret felt the first flutter of hope she'd experienced in days. "You think there might be an error?" "I think every property owner deserves an accurate survey." Marcus smiled. "Give me a few hours, I'll know exactly where your property lines are." While Marcus worked, Margaret executed the second part of her plan. She drove to Hillcrest Cemetery, where Harold rested under the oak tree they'd chosen together. She sat on the stone bench beside his grave and spread out the documents she'd printed the night before. "I need you to help me think this through," she said quietly, ignoring the curious glances from other visitors. "I found something interesting in the county records." The documents showed that Karen's house had been built in 2019, replacing a smaller home that had been demolished. The original property survey from 1962 showed clear boundaries, but the 2019 survey had been amended once during construction, and again 6 months later. 3 different surveys in 4 years. Harold, that's either incredibly thorough or incredibly suspicious. And look at this, the 2019 amendment was filed just 2 weeks after the Johnsons moved out. Karen must have known about the property line issue before she even started harassing me. A cool breeze rustled the oak leaves, and Margaret could almost hear Harold's voice. "Follow the money, Maggie. When someone's working that hard to claim something, there's usually more to it than they're letting on." She drove home to find Marcus packing up his equipment, his expression grim. "Well?" Margaret asked. "You're going to want to sit down for this?" Marcus handed her a folder thick with measurements and diagrams. "According to my survey I've triple-checked these numbers. That concrete divider is sitting 18 inches inside your property line." Margaret's hands shook as she opened the folder. "You're certain, dead certain, either Hartwell made a significant error or ... double quotes." Marcus hesitated. "Or what? Or someone paid him to fudge the numbers. I've seen it before, unfortunately. Property grab schemes where someone commissions a bogus survey to justify a land claim." Marcus pointed to his measurements. "Your property line actually extends 6 feet into what your neighbor is claiming as hers." The implications hit Margaret like a physical blow. She knew she was stealing my land. That would be my guess. The question is, what do you want to do about it? Margaret looked at the concrete divider, at Karen's BMW sitting smugly on her stolen property, at the orange traffic cones Karen had added that morning to mark her parking spaces for the evening's dinner party. "I want to file a complaint with the county surveyor's office. Today, that'll take weeks to process, maybe months. Then, I want to hire a lawyer." Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Henley? That's going to be expensive. Property disputes can drag on for years." Margaret thought of her dwindling savings, of the second mortgage she'd taken to pay Harold's medical bills, of the retirement she'd planned to spend traveling and spoiling grandchildren. Then she thought of Karen's satisfied smile, of the casual cruelty in her voice when she'd dismissed 40 years of memories as tradition. How expensive? Margaret closed her eyes and made a decision that would have horrified the cautious woman she'd been a week ago. "Do you know any lawyers who specialize in property disputes?" By 3 p.m., she was sitting in the office of Catherine Walsh, attorney. At law, Walsh was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair and the predatory smile of someone who genuinely enjoyed legal combat. "This is fascinating," Walsh said, reviewing Marcus's survey results. "A clear case of fraudulent misrepresentation, possibly criminal trespass, definitely grounds for both civil and criminal charges." She looked up at Margaret with obvious relish. "Your neighbor picked the wrong little old lady to mess with." "What are my options?" "Immediate injunction to stop her from using your property. Civil suit for damages and legal fees. Criminal complaint for theft and fraud." Walsh leaned back in her chair, but that's the slow approach. If you want something more immediate, we could file an emergency motion claiming she's causing irreparable harm to your property value. How immediate? Monday morning, I could have sheriff's deputies at her door by noon, ordering her to remove all personal property from your land immediately. Margaret thought of Karen's dinner party, scheduled to begin in 3 hours. 8 couples, Karen had said. 16 people expecting to park in Margaret's driveway, while Karen played the gracious hostess. What about tonight? Walsh raised an eyebrow. Tonight, she's having a party, using my property as her personal parking lot. Margaret felt that familiar steel hardening in her voice. Is there any legal way to stop her? Well, ... Walsh consulted her computer. If you wanted to exercise your property rights immediately, you could post no trespassing signs and call the police to remove any vehicles parked on your land. But that would be ... dramatic. Dramatic? How? Picture this. Your neighbor's elegant dinner party, 8 expensive cars parked in your driveway. Police officers knocking on the door, demanding the vehicles be moved immediately or face towing. Walsh's smile was sharp as a blade. It would certainly send a message. Margaret pictured Karen's face, the humiliation in front of her carefully chosen guests, the social embarrassment that would matter more to someone like Karen than any legal consequences. How much would it cost to hire a towing company for 8 cars? Probably $2,000, cash up front. Walsh studied Margaret's face. But if the cars are on your property without permission, the owners would be responsible for towing. Fees, you'd get your money back. Margaret thought of her savings account, of the life insurance money she'd been carefully hoarding. $2,000 was a lot, but it was also less than she'd spend on a lawyer if this dragged on for months. Do you know a good towing company? Walsh's smile widened. I know the best. At 5:47 p.m., Margaret sat in her kitchen window, watching Karen's guests arrive in a parade of luxury vehicles. Mercedes, BMW, Lexus Tesla, one pulling confidently into Margaret's driveway, each driver chatting on their phones, oblivious to the property dispute that had consumed the week. Karen emerged from her house wearing a cocktail dress that probably cost more than Margaret's monthly Social Security check. She directed traffic like a general positioning troops, pointing each car to a specific spot in the driveway. Margaret counted 9 vehicles. Total Karen had apparently invited more people than she'd originally planned. The no trespassing signs Margaret had posted that afternoon were clearly visible, but the guests either didn't notice or didn't care. Entitled people, Margaret had learned, operated under the assumption that rules applied to other people. At exactly 6:15 p.m., 3 tow trucks rumbled down Maple Street. Margaret had called the police first, of course. Officer Rodriguez had been apologetic but firm. If the vehicles were on her property without permission, and if she had proper documentation of her property boundaries, she was within her rights to have them removed. You sure about this, ma'am? He'd asked. This is going to cause quite a stir, I'm sure. Now, watching the first tow truck position itself behind a silver Mercedes, Margaret felt a savage satisfaction she'd never experienced before. Through Karen's front window, she could see the dinner party in full swing, guests mingling with wine glasses. Karen gesturing animatedly as she held court in her living room. The tow truck's warning beeper cut through the evening air like a fire alarm. Margaret watched Karen's head snap toward the window, watched her face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and finally, pure rage. Karen bolted for her front door. Wine glass still in hand, her heels clicking frantically across her hardwood floors. What the hell do you think? Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made everything seem possible. Margaret stood at her kitchen window, watching Karen pace back and forth on her front lawn. Phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly at the concrete. Divider that now looked increasingly ridiculous in the morning light. Yes, I understand it's early, but this is an emergency. Karen's voice carried across the yard with the desperation of someone whose carefully constructed world was crumbling. She had my guests' cars towed. Do you understand what kind of people? These were, the mayor's wife was there, the country club president. Margaret sipped her coffee and smiled. She'd already received 3 calls that morning, one from her lawyer confirming the emergency injunction had been filed. one from the county surveyor's office scheduling an official property assessment for Wednesday, and one from Channel 7 News, asking if she'd like to comment on the viral video of the dinner party disaster that someone had posted online. The video had been viewed 47,000 times since Saturday night. At 9 a.m., a black sedan pulled up to Karen's house, disgorging a man in an expensive suit who carried himself with the predatory confidence of someone who charged $400 an hour. Margaret watched Karen rush to greet him, her movements frantic and desperate. The lawyer it had to be a lawyer examined the concrete divider, took photographs, and spent 20 minutes measuring distances with a metal tape. Then he walked to Margaret's property line and began taking more photos. Margaret's doorbell rang at 9:47 a.m. "Mrs. Henley, I'm Robert Morrison, representing your neighbor, Karen Westbrook." The man's smile was professionally warm and completely insincere. "I'd like to discuss a resolution to this property dispute. I have a lawyer. I'm sure you do, but litigation is expensive, Mrs. Henley, very expensive. My client is prepared to offer a generous settlement to avoid the costs and uncertainties of court proceedings." Margaret studied his face, seeing the calculation behind his eyes. Karen was scared. The towing incident had been a public humiliation, but this was about more than embarrassment now. A fraudulent survey could mean criminal charges, professional sanctions for the surveyor, and civil liability that could reach into the hundreds of thousands. "What kind of settlement?" "My client will remove the concrete divider at her own expense and acknowledge the correct property boundaries. In exchange, you agree not to pursue criminal charges or civil damages." Morrison's smile widened. "Very reasonable, considering the circumstances. And the 40 years of property use, the emotional distress, the legal fees I've already incurred." Morrison's smile faltered slightly. "Mrs. Henley, I think you should consider the practical realities. Here, you're on a fixed income, facing a neighbor who has significant financial resources. Even if you win in court, which is far from certain, the legal costs could bankrupt you." It was a threat wrapped in legal language, but Margaret had spent the weekend learning about property law, civil procedure, and her rights as a homeowner. She'd also spent Sunday afternoon with Harold's old baseball bat, practicing her swing in the backyard. "Mr. Morrison, you can tell your client that I'll see her in court." The lawyer's professional mask slipped for just a moment. "Mrs. Henley, I don't think you understand the forces you're dealing with here." "I understand perfectly." Margaret opened the door wider. "I understand that your client committed fraud to steal my property. I understand that she threatened to make my life hell in front of witnesses. And I understand that she's terrified of the consequences." After Morrison left, Margaret called her contractor. Tony Marcelli had installed Margaret's new roof 3 years ago, had fixed her kitchen plumbing last winter, and had been Harold's poker buddy for 15 years. He was also, as it happened, the owner of Marcelli Construction and Landscaping, a company that specialized in driveways, foundations, and large-scale earth-moving projects. "Maggie, I heard about your neighbor problems," Tony said when she called. "That lady's got some brass. I'll give her that. Tony, I need a favor." "Big one. Name it." "I want you to remove that concrete divider today." "Maggie, I got 3 jobs scheduled. I'll pay double your normal rate. Cash." A pause. "What aren't you telling me?" Margaret looked out at Karen's BMW, sitting smugly in what was legally her driveway. "I'm also going to need 20 tons of gravel delivered, the really big stones. River rock. 20 tons. What the hell are you planning?" "I'm planning to exercise my property rights." Tony was quiet for a long moment. "Maggie, Harold was my friend. If that woman is giving you grief, just say the word, and I'll handle it. I'm handling it myself. The question is, are you going to help me? When do you want the gravel?" "This afternoon, right after you remove the concrete." At 11:30 a.m., Tony's crew arrived with jackhammers, a small excavator, and the kind of focused efficiency that comes from working for someone who pays in cash. The concrete divider began disappearing. In chunks, the sound of breaking cement echoing through the neighborhood like controlled demolition. Karen emerged from her house like a fury, her lawyer trailing behind her with obvious reluctance. "You can't do this," she screamed over the jackhammers. "That's a legal property boundary." Margaret stepped out of her house carrying Marcus's survey report and a court document that had arrived by courier an hour earlier. "Actually, I can. She handed the papers to Morrison, whose face went pale as he read. Emergency injunction granted by Judge Patterson. Your client has 12 hours to remove all structures from my property. Morrison scanned the document quickly. This is ... We'll appeal this immediately. You do that? Margaret smiled. In the meantime, that concrete is coming out. Karen's face was approaching the color of a ripe tomato. This is harassment. I'm calling the police. Go ahead, ready. Called them. Officer Rodriguez is on his way to supervise the removal of illegal structures from my property. By 2 p.m., the concrete divider was gone, reduced to a pile of rubble that Tony's crew loaded into their truck. Karen's BMW sat alone in the newly unified driveway, looking suddenly vulnerable without its concrete protection. Where do you want? The gravel, Mrs. Henley, Tony asked. Margaret looked at the BMW, then at Karen, who was standing on her front porch with her phone pressed to her ear, probably calling every lawyer in the phone book. Right there, Margaret pointed to the exact spot where Karen's car was parked. All 20 tons of it. Tony followed her gaze and grinned. You want me to bury the car? I want you to deliver gravel to my driveway. If there happens to be a trespassing vehicle in the way. ... double quotes, Margaret shrugged. That's not my problem, Maggie. I like your style. The first dump truck arrived at 2:47 p.m., its diesel engine rumbling like distant thunder. Karen came running out of her house, keys jingling in her hand, but she was too late. The truck's hydraulic system engaged with a mechanical whine, and the first load of river rock began pouring out like a gray avalanche. Margaret had positioned herself on her front porch with a lawn chair and a glass of iced tea, watching the proceedings with the satisfaction of someone who had waited 71 years to stop being reasonable. The rocks were beautiful, round stones ranging from softball-sized to bowling ball-sized, tumbling over Karen's BMW like a geological waterfall. The first load covered the hood and windshield. The second load buried the doors. By the third load, only the roof and rear window were visible. Karen stood on the sidewalk, screaming at the dump truck driver, at Margaret, at the gathering crowd of neighbors who had come to witness what would undoubtedly become neighborhood legend. You can't do this. That's my car. That's a $40,000 car. Then you should have parked it on your own property, Margaret called back pleasantly. Officer Rodriguez arrived just as the fourth dump truck was backing into position. He surveyed the scene with the weary expression of someone who had spent too many years mediating neighbor disputes. Mrs. Henley, what's going on here? Margaret handed him the survey results and the court injunction. I'm having gravel delivered. To my driveway. Officer, if someone parked their car in my driveway without permission, that's their problem. Rodriguez examined the documents, then looked at the BMW, now completely buried except for one corner of the rear bumper. Ma'am, did you warn the car owner before you started dumping gravel? I posted no trespassing signs on Friday. I had the property officially surveyed on Saturday. I filed a court injunction on Sunday. Margaret's voice was calm and reasonable. Ms. Westbrook has had multiple opportunities to move her vehicle. Karen pushed forward, her face streaked with tears of rage. She's doing this on purpose. She's destroying my car. Ma'am, Rodriguez said gently, is this your vehicle? Yes. And where exactly is it parked? Karen's mouth opened and closed, like a fish. The property survey was clear, the court order was legal, and her BMW was indisputably sitting on Margaret's land. It's the property line, ... According to this official survey, your vehicle is parked approximately 6 feet inside Mrs. Henley's property boundaries. Rodriguez handed the papers back to Margaret. I'm sorry, ma'am, but you'll need to contact your insurance company. This appears to be a civil matter. The fifth and final dump truck finished its delivery at 4:23 p.m. 20 tons of river rock now formed a perfect pyramid in Margaret's driveway.